A crying German shepherd did not want to leave the little boy's coffin, and when the parents realized why, their entire world flipped upside down. At the funeral, this loyal dog refuses to move, scratching, crying, almost throwing himself over the coffin, as if he's trying to warn them. The grieving parents think it's just heartbreak, until they notice something strange, something the dog keeps going back to, something that should never be inside a child's coffin. And when they open it, they discover a secret their son tried to hide, a secret so shocking it pulls them into a dangerous fight they never saw coming. A secret powerful people would do anything to bury. Why was the dog so desperate that day? What did the parents find inside the coffin? And who is willing to silence them before the truth comes out? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The autumn wind whispered through the military cemetery, rustling the neat rows of American flags that marked each grave. The late October morning had dawned cold and gray, matching the somber mood that hung over the gathered mourners. Metal chairs, arranged in precise rows on the grass, creaked softly as people shifted uncomfortably, their eyes fixed on the small wooden coffin at the center of it all. Elise Redding stood rigid beside her husband, Colt, her fingers wrapped so tightly around Blitz's leash that her knuckles had turned white. The German shepherd, usually a model of composure, had been restless since they'd arrived. His amber eyes hadn't left the coffin containing 10-year-old Lucas, his young master and devoted friend. We gather here today to remember and celebrate the life of Lucas James Redding, the chaplain began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. Blitz's whimper cut through the silence. Elise tugged gently on his leash, trying to quiet him. "Shh, boy," she whispered, her voice cracking. The dog's ears were forward, his posture tense and alert, a stark contrast to his usual calm demeanor at Lucas's side. Colt stood at parade rest, his jaw clenched tight, eyes forward. Years of military discipline helped him maintain his composure, but Elise could see the subtle tremor in his hands. He'd folded the flag that would be presented to them with practiced precision, each crisp triangle a testimony to his need for order in this moment of chaos. The chaplain continued. Lucas touched many lives in his brief 10 years. Another whimper from Blitz, louder this time. Several mourners turned to look. Elise felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, but something about Blitz's behavior sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't normal restlessness or grief. The German shepherd was trained better than this. Lucas had made sure of that. "Maybe you should take him back to the car," Colt murmured, breaking his forward stare to glance at his wife. Before Elise could respond, Blitz lunged forward with surprising force. The sudden movement caught her off guard, and the leash slipped through her fingers. The German shepherd bounded straight for the coffin, his nails clicking against the polished wood as he scrambled to get closer to one particular corner. "Blitz!" Elise called out, her voice sharp with panic. "Come!" But the dog ignored her command, something he'd never done before. Instead, he began scratching frantically at the corner of the coffin, his whimpers turning into urgent barks. The sound echoed across the cemetery, shattering the solemnity of the occasion. Colt moved quickly, his military boots crushing the manicured grass as he strode toward Blitz. "I'll get him," he said, reaching for the dog's collar. But Blitz was fixated, his claws leaving marks on the wooden surface as he continued to scratch and paw at that specific spot. The watching crowd had abandoned any pretense of polite disinterest, openly staring now as the scene unfolded. "What's wrong with that dog?" someone whispered loudly. "This is highly inappropriate," another voice added. Elise felt frozen in place, watching as her husband struggled to pull Blitz away. The dog's behavior wasn't just unusual, it was alerting behavior, the same kind he'd been trained for when monitoring Lucas's medical condition. But Lucas was gone. What could Blitz possibly be alerting to now? The chaplain cleared his throat uncomfortably, clutching his prayer book closer to his chest. The honor guard shifted uneasily, their crisp uniforms a stark contrast to the disorder unfolding before them. "Blitz, heel!" Colt commanded, his voice carrying the authority of years of military service. But even this failed to deter the dog, who continued his desperate attempt to get at whatever he was sensing in that corner of the coffin. Elise finally found her feet moving, drawn forward by some instinct she couldn't name. As she approached, she could see the deep scratches Blitz had left in the wood, concentrated in one specific area. The dog's behavior was too focused, too intentional to be random grief. "Colt," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "this isn't right. Something's wrong." Her husband's face was a mask of conflicting emotions, the need to maintain order warring with his trust in both his wife and the dog that had been such an integral part of their son's life. The gathered mourners had begun to murmur more loudly now, their discomfort palpable in the crisp autumn air. Blitz gave another urgent bark, his whole body trembling with the intensity of whatever he was trying to communicate. His training had taught him to alert to specific chemical changes, to warning signs that something wasn't right with Lucas. Even now, with Lucas gone, he was trying to do his job. The honor guard exchanged uncertain glances, their ceremonial duties disrupted by this unexpected development. The chaplain had stopped speaking entirely, his prayer book hanging forgotten at his side, as he watched the scene unfold. Elise moved closer to the coffin, her hand reaching out to touch the spot Blitz had been so frantically indicating. The wood was warm beneath her fingers, scored with deep scratches from the dog's persistent clawing. Something about this moment felt pivotal, as if the careful narrative of their son's death was beginning to unravel thread by thread. "Mrs. Redding," the funeral director stepped forward, his voice strained with forced politeness. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess until—" But Blitz cut him off with another series of barks, more insistent than before. The German Shepherd's behavior had shifted from distressed to determined, his training overriding everything else. He knew something was wrong, and he wouldn't stop until someone understood. Colt's hand found Elise's shoulder, steady and strong despite the tension radiating through him. The crowd's whispers had grown louder, a wave of discomfort rippling through the assembled mourners. What had begun as a solemn military funeral had transformed into something else entirely, something that felt like the beginning of a question neither of them had thought to ask. The autumn wind picked up, scattering leaves across the cemetery grounds and ruffling the flags that stood sentinel over each grave. But Blitz remained focused, unwavering in his certainty that something about this corner of the coffin demanded attention. His earlier whimpers had given way to determined, alerting behavior, each bark and scratch a message they were only beginning to understand. Elise felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but these weren't just tears of grief anymore. They were tears of confusion, of dawning suspicion, of a mother's intuition aligning with a service dog's training to suggest that perhaps Lucas's story wasn't as complete as they'd been led to believe. The funeral had come to a complete standstill. The honor guard stood frozen, the chaplain silent, and dozens of pairs of eyes fixed on the scene before them. What should have been a dignified farewell had become something else entirely. The first crack in what the Reddings believed about their son's death, sparked by the unwavering instincts of a dog who had never stopped trying to protect his young charge. The tension at the military cemetery had reached a breaking point. Elise's hands trembled as she stood beside the coffin, her fingers still resting on the spot where Blitz had been so desperately scratching. The German Shepherd hadn't moved, his body pressed against the wooden surface, amber eyes fixed and alert. "We need to open it," Elise said, her voice stronger than she expected. The words seemed to hang in the autumn air, drawing shocked gasps from the gathered mourners. The funeral director stepped forward, his face pinched with disapproval. "Mrs. Redding, I must object. This is highly irregular and completely against protocol. Think of the spectacle." "Spectacle?" Elise's voice cracked. "My son is in there, and his service dog is telling us something's wrong. Blitz was trained to detect specific changes in Lucas's condition. He never gave a false alert, not once in 3 years." The chaplain moved closer, prayer book clutched to his chest like a shield. "My dear, I understand you're grieving, but this isn't appropriate. We should proceed with the service and let your boy rest in peace." Elise felt the familiar surge of protective instinct that had driven her through years of advocating for Lucas's medical care. "No, something isn't right. I won't let you lower that coffin until we know what Blitz is trying to tell us." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some mourners shifted uncomfortably, while others watched with undisguised curiosity. The honor guard maintained their positions, though their eyes darted uncertainly between the coffin and their commanding officers. The funeral director's face reddened. "This is absolutely out of the question. We have regulations, procedures." "To hell with your procedures," Elise snapped, her composure cracking. "My son spent his whole life following medical procedures. If something's wrong, I need to know. Now." Colt, who had been standing silently beside her, finally spoke. His voice carried the weight of his military rank and years of command. "As a staff sergeant in the United States Army, I'm formally requesting this coffin be opened for inspection." The funeral director sputtered. "You don't have the authority to—" "Actually, I do." Colt's tone was steel wrapped in velvet. "This is a military funeral on a military cemetery. Given reasonable cause for concern about the contents of this coffin, I have every right to demand inspection." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Don't make me call my commanding officer." The threat hung in the air. After several tense moments, the funeral director gave a sharp nod to his assistants. They moved forward reluctantly, their practiced movements now hesitant and uncertain. Blitz backed away just enough to allow them to work, but his posture remained alert, focused entirely on the corner of the coffin he'd been so desperate to reach. The latches clicked open one by one, each sound echoing across the now silent cemetery. Elise held her breath as the lid was slowly raised. The familiar blue blanket she'd tucked around Lucas was folded neatly over his small form, but something about it looked different. Her hands shook as she reached for the fabric. "There," she whispered, fingers finding an unusual seam. "This wasn't here before." With trembling fingers, she traced what appeared to be a carefully sewn pocket in the blanket's corner. Inside, she felt something hard and cold. Pulling it out, she found a small glass vial, its contents leaking slightly through a hairline crack. Beside it was a folded piece of paper covered in Lucas's careful handwriting. Blitz whined and pawed at the vial, confirming what they'd already guessed. This was what had triggered his alert behavior. The scent he'd been trained to detect was somehow present in that mysterious container. Colt gently took the note from Elise's hands, unfolding it carefully. They could see Lucas's distinctive writing, slightly messier than usual, as if he'd been rushing. The childlike urgency of the message made their hearts sink. "Mom and Dad, if you're reading this, Blitz did his job. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you before, but I had to make sure you'd find this. The medicine they gave us wasn't right. There's something bad in it. I heard the doctors talking when they thought I was asleep. Please help the other kids in the Y12 trial. They don't know what's happening either. I love you. Lucas. Elise's legs gave out, and Colt caught her before she could fall. The note trembled in his hands as the implications of their son's last message sank in. Around them, the crowd had gone completely silent, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the autumn wind and Blitz's low whimpers. The German shepherd pressed against Elise's leg, his mission finally accomplished. He had delivered Lucas's message, just as he'd been trained to alert them to danger. But this time, the danger wasn't just to Lucas. It extended far beyond their small family to other children they'd never met. The funeral director stood frozen, his earlier objections forgotten in the face of this unexpected discovery. The honor guard maintained their positions, but their expressions had shifted from professional detachment to barely concealed concern. The chaplain's prayer book hung forgotten at his side as he stared at the scene before him. Elise clutched the vial and note to her chest, her tears falling freely now. But these weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of realization, of anger, of a mother's determination being born from the ashes of her sorrow. Her son had left them one final mission, and she could feel in her bones that this was just the beginning. The sleek glass doors of the Midwest Clinical Research Center loomed before them, a stark contrast to the weathered granite headstones they'd left behind. Elise clutched Lucas's note in one hand and the mysterious vial in the other, her knuckles white with determination. Colt walked beside her, his military bearing somehow both reassuring and tense. Blitz padded alongside them, his ears forward and alert. The reception area was all chrome and soft beige, designed to project calm competence. The receptionist's practiced smile faltered when she recognized them. "Mrs. Redding, we weren't expecting." "Dr. Keene," Elise cut in, her voice raw but steady. "Now." "I'm afraid Dr. Keene is in meetings all afternoon. Tell him Lucas Redding's parents are here." Colt's tone left no room for argument. "He'll make time." While they waited, Elise paced the pristine lobby, her boots squeaking against the polished floor. Her mind raced through every appointment, every conversation, every moment when Lucas had seemed different. The signs had been there, hadn't they? The way he'd grown quieter toward the end, how he'd insisted on keeping his blanket close, even on warm days. After 15 minutes that felt like hours, Dr. Randall Keene appeared in the doorway. His steel-gray hair was perfectly styled, his white coat crisp and spotless. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of professional sympathy. "Mr. and Mrs. Redding," he said softly, "I understand this is a difficult time. Perhaps we should speak in my office?" Elise wanted to scream, but she followed him down the sterile hallway, past closed doors and busy nurses who avoided eye contact. Blitz stayed close to her leg, his body language growing more alert with each step. Keene's office was exactly what you'd expect. Degrees on the wall, abstract art in muted colors, a heavy desk designed to create distance between doctor and patient. He gestured to the chairs across from him, but Elise remained standing. "We found this," she said, placing the vial on his desk. "In Lucas's coffin, along with this note." She unfolded the paper, her son's last words facing Keene accusingly. The doctor barely glanced at either item. "Mrs. Redding, grief can make us see patterns where none exist. Your son was very ill." "Don't!" Elise's voice cracked. "Don't you dare try to explain this away. Lucas knew something was wrong with the trial medication. He left us proof." "The Y12 trial went through all proper protocols," Keene replied, his tone becoming more clinical. "Every participant's family signed extensive documentation acknowledging the experimental nature of the treatment, including yourselves." Colt stepped forward. "We signed those papers because you promised it was his best chance, because you said the risks were minimal." "All risks were fully disclosed." "Were they?" Elise pulled out her phone, showing screenshots she'd taken of Lucas's medical records. Because these documents don't match the copies we were given during treatment, the dosage numbers are different. The side effect reports are missing entire pages. For just a moment, something flickered behind Keen's practiced smile, but his voice remained steady. Medical records are complex. It's easy for laypeople to misinterpret. I was a combat medic for 12 years, Elise cut in. I know how to read medical charts. These were altered. Keen leaned back in his chair, his demeanor shifting from sympathetic to stern. Mrs. Redding, I must remind you that you're bound by multiple non-disclosure agreements regarding the trial. Making unfounded accusations could have serious legal consequences. At the word legal, Elise slammed her hands on his desk. Papers scattered. My son is dead! He knew something was wrong. And instead of telling us, he had to hide evidence in his own coffin because he didn't trust the people who were supposed to help him. Colt moved to restrain her, his hands gentle but firm on her shoulders. Elise. But she shrugged him, off, her voice rising. How many other children are in danger? How many other families don't know what you're really giving their kids? I think, Keen said, standing slowly, this meeting is over. You're clearly not in a state to have a rational discussion. I suggest you focus on moving on healing. Don't let grief turn into something destructive. The threat in his words was barely veiled. But before anyone could respond, Blitz suddenly went rigid, his nose working overtime. He moved to the vial still sitting on Keen's desk and gave the alert signal he'd been trained to use when detecting dangerous changes in Lucas's condition. Keen reached for the vial, but Elise was faster. She snatched it back, watching the doctor's face carefully. Interesting that a service dog trained to detect specific chemical markers in Lucas's blood is so interested in this sample, isn't it? Get out. Keen's professional mask cracked slightly. Before I call security. We're leaving, Colt said firmly, taking Elise's arm. But this isn't over. As they walked out, Elise's mind was racing. She'd seen enough guilty men in her military days to recognize the signs, the micro-expressions, the subtle tells. Keen was hiding something big, and his attempts to dismiss them had only strengthened her resolve. In the parking lot, Colt finally spoke. You know he's going to try to bury this. Let him try. Elise looked down at the vial in her hand, then at Blitz, who was still on high alert. Lucas trusted us to finish what he started, and I'm not stopping until we know the truth. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the clinic's manicured lawn as they walked to their car. Behind them, through the glass doors, they could see Keen on his phone, his movements sharp with agitation. Whatever he was hiding, whatever had happened to Lucas and possibly other children, it was clear that this was just the beginning of a much larger fight. The late afternoon sun filtered through Lucas's bedroom window, casting a warm glow over his untouched space. Elise stood in the doorway, her hand trembling on the light switch. She hadn't been able to enter his room since that day. But now, purpose drove her forward, where grief had held her back. You okay? Colt asked softly from behind her. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Blitz pushed past them both, heading straight for Lucas's bed with its Star Wars comforter still rumpled exactly as he'd left it. The sight made her throat tight. Where should we start? Colt asked, his military training kicking in, trying to approach this methodically. Elise took a deep breath. His desk. Lucas was always so organized. If he was tracking something, that's where it would be. They moved to the small desk tucked under the window. Everything was exactly as Lucas had arranged it. Colored pencils in their holder, his favorite books stacked neatly, his tablet propped against the wall. Elise pulled open the top drawer, revealing folders labeled in Lucas's careful handwriting. Look at this, she said, pulling out a folder marked Medical. Inside were dozens of papers, some official documents from the trial, others covered in Lucas's own notes. Blitz's ears perked up as she spread them across the desk. He was documenting everything, Colt said, his voice thick with emotion. Times, dates, symptoms. Elisa's hands shook as she sorted through the papers. There were photocopies of consent forms, trial protocols, and daily logs. But what caught her eye were the sticky notes Lucas had attached to various pages, his observations written in different colored pens. Doctor said dose is 0.5 milliliters, but nurse gave 1.0, she read aloud. Asked about red spots, told not to worry. Same spots Tommy H. had before. Her voice trailed off. Blitz suddenly barked, pawing at a particular stack of papers. They all mentioned something called the Y-12 cohort, the trial group Lucas had been part of. Look at these dates, Colt said, comparing documents. The visit log they gave us shows he was there on March 12th, but Lucas wrote he was actually there on March 15th. And these signatures... He held up 2 forms. These don't match. Same doctor, completely different signatures. Elisa's training as a combat medic kicked in as she examined the treatment protocols. This isn't right. They told us the drug was supposed to be administered every 72 hours, but these records show some kids getting it every 48 hours. And look, there are whole sections about potential side effects that aren't included in the copies they gave us. She found Lucas's personal journal buried at the bottom of the drawer. Opening it made her heart catch. His familiar handwriting, the way he dotted his I's with tiny circles. Don't tell Mom and Dad yet, she read, tears blurring her vision. Need more proof. Tommy got really sick after they changed his medicine. They said it wasn't connected, but I saw his chart when nurse left computer open. Colt sank onto Lucas's bed, running a hand over his face. He knew. All this time, he knew something was wrong, and he didn't. Why didn't he tell us? Because he was protecting us, Elise realized, reading further. Dad always follows rules. Mom always fights for people. Need to do this right or Dr. K will make it go away. She looked up at Colt. He knew exactly what would happen if he just told us. He knew we'd either dismiss it or charge in without proof. Blitz whined, nosing through more papers until he found a list of names, other children in the trial. Next to some names were dates and notes. Dropped out, too sick. Moved away suddenly. No more updates. The methodical documentation hit Elise like a physical blow. Their 10-year-old son, sick and scared, had been building a case. While they'd been focusing on keeping his spirits up, on trusting the doctors and following protocols, Lucas had been investigating. The weight of it, his courage, his loneliness in carrying this burden, made her legs weak. Here, Colt said, finding another journal entry. Blitz knows. He smells when the medicine is wrong. Training him to alert, like Mom taught me. Just in case. Elise remembered how she'd helped Lucas work with Blitz, thinking they were just giving him a project to focus on during long hospital stays. But Lucas had turned it into something more. He'd trained his dog to detect whatever was wrong with the trial drug. The pieces were falling into place. Why Blitz had reacted so strongly at the funeral. Why Lucas had hidden the vial. Her son had known he was running out of time, and he'd made sure the truth wouldn't be buried with him. All this time, she whispered, gathering the papers with trembling hands. All this time, he was trying to save the other children. He knew what might happen. Colt stood, his jaw set in the way Elise recognized from their military days, the look of a soldier who'd found his mission. Then we finish what he started. We find out what Keen and his team are hiding. We protect those other kids. Elise looked around the room, at the space shuttle model Lucas had been building, the science fair ribbons on his wall, the books about becoming a doctor someday. Their brilliant, brave boy had left them a trail to follow. Grief still crushed her chest, but now it was mixed with something else. Purpose. "We need to contact these other families," she said, holding up the list of names. "Find out if their children had similar reactions. Build on the evidence Lucas collected." Blitz sat at attention, his eyes fixed on them with an intensity that reminded her so much of Lucas. The service dog had been their son's partner in uncovering this mystery. Now he would help them solve it. As the evening light faded from the room, Elise and Colt carefully gathered every document, every note, every piece of evidence their son had collected. Their grief hadn't lessened, but it had transformed into something focused, something driven. Lucas had trusted them to see what he'd discovered. He'd believed they would fight for the truth. They wouldn't let him down. The fluorescent lights of the clinic's administrative wing buzzed overhead as Elise watched staff members come and go. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she forced herself to appear casual, just another parent waiting in the hallway. Blitz sat alertly at her feet, his presence both comforting and purposeful. Finally, she spotted her target, Rhea Calder, the data coordinator she'd seen during Lucas's appointments. The young woman was walking quickly, head down, clutching a canvas tote bag against her chest like a shield. Everything about her posture screamed anxiety. "Ms. Calder?" Elise called out softly, rising from her chair. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Rhea's head snapped up, her eyes widening, with recognition and fear. "Mrs. Redding, I'm actually running late for a meeting." She quickened her pace, but Elise fell into step beside her. "Please, it's about Lucas." Elise kept her voice low, steady. "I think you know something isn't right with this trial." I really can't discuss anything about the study." Rhea's knuckles whitened around the strap of her bag. "There are confidentiality agreements, protocols. My son is dead." The words came out harder than Elise intended, making Rhea flinch. "He left evidence, Ms. Calder. He knew something was wrong with the trial." They'd reached an empty break room. Rhea glanced around nervously before stepping inside, her shoulders hunched. "Mrs. Redding, I'm very sorry about Lucas, but I could lose my job just talking to you." Before Elise could respond, Blitz suddenly focused on Rhea's tote bag. His nose twitched, and he moved forward with the same intensity he'd shown at the funeral. Rhea stumbled backward, clutching the bag tighter. "He's trained to detect something in the trial medication," Elise explained, watching Rhea's face pale. "And right now he's telling me there's something in your bag that matches that scent." Rhea's breathing quickened. She looked from Blitz to Elise, then at the door. For a moment, Elise thought she might bolt. Instead, tears welled in her eyes. "I never meant—" Rhea's voice cracked. She sank into a chair, the bag sliding to the floor. "I wanted to help people. That's why I took this job. But then I started seeing patterns in the data that didn't make sense." Elise sat across from her, while Blitz remained focused on the bag. "What kind of patterns?" "Children who were supposed to be receiving the trial drug, their blood work didn't match the expected markers. I thought it was a mistake at first." Rhea wiped her eyes with trembling hands. "But when I brought it up to Dr. Keene, he said I was misinterpreting the data, told me to adjust the numbers to match the projected outcomes." "You were falsifying results?" "They said it was standard procedure, that sometimes data needs to be normalized." The self-disgust in Rhea's voice was palpable. "But then children started getting sicker, like Lucas, like Tommy Martinez, kids who were promised the new treatment but weren't actually receiving it." Elise's throat tightened. "A placebo group." Rhea nodded miserably. "But they never told the families. Everyone was promised active treatment. That was how they got so many participants. Parents desperate for help. She reached down and opened her bag, pulling out several flash drives. I started making copies, documentation, original data, internal emails. I knew it was wrong, but I was scared to come forward. These people, they have powerful connections. What made you keep the evidence? Because someone needed to know the truth. Ria's voice strengthened slightly. These children trusted us. Their parents trusted us. And I let them down. Blitz whined softly, pressing his head against Ria's knee. The simple gesture of comfort seemed to break something in her. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. "I'm so sorry about Lucas," she whispered. "He was such a bright boy. He asked such careful questions about the trial. I should have realized he was piecing it together." Elise reached out, gently touching Ria's arm. "You're doing the right thing now. That's what matters." "They'll destroy me for this." Fear crept back into Ria's voice. "Dr. Keene, the pharmaceutical company. They'll make sure I never work in research again. They might even press charges for stealing data." "Not if we handle this carefully." Elise's mind was already working, planning. "I have military contacts, people who know how to protect whistleblowers. You won't have to face this alone." Ria looked up, studying Elise's face. "Why aren't you angry with me? I was part of this. I knew what was happening and didn't stop it." "Because you're choosing to help now," Elise said simply. "And because being angry won't bring Lucas back or help the other children. What matters is making this right." Blitz nudged the flash drives with his nose, then looked up at Elise with those intelligent eyes that had seen so much. She could almost imagine Lucas's hand on his head, training him for this moment, believing that someone would be brave enough to help reveal the truth. "What's on these drives?" she asked Ria. "Everything. Original trial protocols, unaltered test results, the real assignment of placebo versus treatment groups." Ria's voice steadied as she spoke. "Internal communications about keeping the placebo group secret. Financial records showing how much money they were saving by giving placebos while charging full price for participation." "And you can verify all of this? Testify that these records are authentic?" Ria took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders slightly. "Yes. I know it won't make up for what happened to Lucas and the others. But yes, I'll testify. These children deserved better than to be treated like data points on a spreadsheet." Elise carefully gathered the flash drives, securing them in her own bag. "Thank you, Ria. I know how much courage this takes." "Lucas had courage," Ria said quietly. "He knew something was wrong and he tried to expose it. The least I can do is finish what he started." They exchanged contact information, Elise providing the number of a trusted lawyer who could help protect Ria's rights as a whistleblower. As they prepared to leave the break room separately to avoid suspicion, Ria paused. "Mrs. Redding, there's something else you should know." She glanced nervously at the door. "The trial isn't over. There are still children in the placebo group, still families being told their kids are receiving treatment when they're not. Whatever you do with this information, please hurry." Elise nodded, her resolve hardening. For Lucas, for every child in this trial, for every parent who trusted these doctors with their most precious responsibility, the truth would come out. And this time, no one would be able to bury it. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the law office parking lot as Elise and Ria emerged from their 3-hour meeting with Patricia Winters, a veteran attorney specializing in medical malpractice and whistleblower protection. Blitz padded faithfully beside them, his alert posture matching the gravity of what had just transpired. "Are you sure you'll be okay getting home?" Elise asked Ria, noting how the younger woman's hands trembled as she clutched her purse. "Yes, I took a rideshare here. They can't trace that. Rhea managed a weak smile. Ms. Winters was right. Staying in my normal routine is safer than suddenly changing everything. Elise nodded, remembering the lawyer's detailed safety protocols. Remember what she said. Document everything. Stay aware of your surroundings, and call immediately if anything seems off. They parted ways, with Rhea heading towards the street to wait for her ride. Elise watched until she was safely picked up before leading Blitz to her own car, an aging blue sedan that had weathered countless trips to Lucas's medical appointments. The familiar ache in her chest returned as she opened the door for Blitz to hop into the back seat. The drive home started uneventfully. Elise took the winding back road that would eventually connect to the highway, her mind replaying the attorney's words about building an airtight case. The flash drives were now secure in Ms. Winters' office, safe, their contents being carefully reviewed by her team. Lost in thought, she almost missed the dark SUV that suddenly appeared in her rearview mirror, approaching fast. Too fast. Blitz's sharp bark snapped her attention fully to the present. The SUV was riding her bumper now, so close she couldn't see its headlights. Elise's combat training kicked in as she assessed the situation. This was no accident. The driver was trying to intimidate her, or worse. She pressed the accelerator, but the SUV matched her speed exactly, staying dangerously close. When she slowed, it slowed. When she sped up, it followed. The message was clear. They were in control. Blitz's barking grew more urgent. Through the mirror, Elise caught a glimpse of his ears pricked forward, body tense with alertness. She knew that posture. He sensed danger. The road ahead curved sharply, with a steep ravine dropping off to the right. As they approached the bend, the SUV suddenly accelerated, pulling alongside her car. Elise's hands tightened on the wheel as she saw the vehicle begin to drift toward her lane. They were going to force her off the road. Time seemed to slow as her military training took over. She could hear her combat instructor's voice. When under attack, use your opponent's force against them. Instead of fighting the SUV's pressure, she let her car drift slightly, toward the ravine, making them think they were succeeding. The other driver pressed harder, committed to their attack. At the last possible moment, Elise slammed on her brakes while turning the wheel sharply left. The SUV, still pushing sideways, suddenly found nothing to push against. Its momentum carried it past her car, tires skidding as the driver tried to correct. Blitz's warning bark reached a fever pitch as Elise expertly maneuvered her car into the opposite lane, safely away from the ravine. In her mirror, she saw the SUV fishtail before its driver managed to regain control. Within seconds, it had disappeared around the next curve. Her hands were steady on the wheel, but her heart hammered against her ribs. She pulled over at the first safe spot, fumbling for her phone to call Colt. "Elise." His voice was instantly alert, picking up on her tension. "What's wrong?" "Someone just tried to run me off the road." She described the incident in clipped, precise terms, falling back on her military reporting style. "Black SUV, no plates visible, tinted windows. They knew what they were doing, Colt. This wasn't random road rage." "Where are you?" She could hear him already grabbing his keys. "Stay put. I'm coming to you." The back road off Mountain View, about 2 miles past the Morgan Creek turnoff. "Blitz is with me," she added, reaching back to touch the dog's head. He had settled somewhat, but remained vigilant, eyes scanning their surroundings. 15 minutes later, Colt's truck roared into view. He parked behind her car and was at her door in seconds, his face tight with concern. "Are you hurt?" He checked her over with careful eyes, then glanced at Blitz. "Either of you?" "We're okay." Elise let out a shaky breath, the adrenaline finally wearing off. "But Colt, this means we're on to something big." They wouldn't try to silence us if we weren't close to the truth. He wrapped his arms around her, and she felt his own trembling, fear masked by military steadiness. We need to be more careful. Maybe get some security cameras for the house. Change up our routines. We can't back down, she said firmly, pulling back to meet his eyes. Lucas left us those clues for a reason. Other children are still in danger. I know. His jaw tightened. But we do this smart. No more traveling alone. We document everything. And we make sure Rhea stays safe, too. She's taking an enormous risk. Blitz woofed softly from the back seat, as if agreeing with the plan. Elise managed a small smile, reaching back to scratch his ears. Good boy. You knew something was wrong before I did, didn't you? Let me drive you home, Colt said. We'll come back for your car later with some backup. As they transferred to Colt's truck, Elise couldn't shake the image of the SUV bearing down on her. The incident had transformed their quest from an investigation into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Someone powerful wanted this truth to stay buried, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to make that happen. But they hadn't counted on a grieving mother's determination, a soldier's protective instincts, a loyal dog's warnings, and most importantly, the evidence a brave 10-year-old boy had gathered before his death. Lucas had known the risks. He'd left them a trail to follow, trusting they would see it through. As they drove home in tense silence, Elise's mind was already working on next steps. They needed to move faster now, but also smarter. The attack proved they were on the right track, and that their opponents were getting desperate. Rhea's hands trembled as she typed commands into her laptop. The flash drives from her tote bag lay scattered across the Reddings' kitchen table, each one containing pieces of the puzzle Lucas had died trying to solve. Blitz lay at her feet, his amber eyes tracking every movement, occasionally nudging her leg when her typing slowed. These encryption protocols weren't meant to keep people out, she explained, her voice tight with concentration. They were designed to organize data between different trial sites. I helped set them up, so I know the back doors. Elise stood behind her, one hand gripping the back of Rhea's chair. The other clutched a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Colt paced nearby, his military bearing at odds with the nervous energy radiating from him. There, Rhea said, as columns of data filled the screen. This is the real Y-12 cohort data, not the sanitized version in the official reports. Elise leaned closer, her eyes scanning the rows of numbers and codes. What are we looking at? Patient responses, treatment schedules, dosage levels? Rhea's finger traced across the screen, then stopped. Here, look at these entries from 6 months ago. The timestamp showed 3:15 a.m., well outside normal clinic hours. A series of file access logs appeared, showing someone had viewed multiple patient records, comparing treatment responses against placebo group data. That's when Lucas figured it out, Rhea said softly. He used my computer terminal when I'd stepped away. I'd left it logged in, stupid mistake, but he was just this sweet kid who always hung around asking questions about the trial. I never thought... Her voice cracked. Elise squeezed her shoulder, encouraging her to continue. He saw his own records alongside the treatment group data. The differences were obvious if you knew what to look for. Lucas was brilliant. He understood more than any of us realized. Colt stopped pacing. Are you saying our son knew he wasn't getting the real treatment? Not just knew it. Rhea opened another file. He documented everything. Look at these access patterns, systematic, methodical. He was building a case. The screen filled with more logs, each showing careful exploration of different patient files. Lucas had been thorough, checking and cross-checking data points that proved the placebo group wasn't random as claimed. Instead, certain patients had been deliberately selected, children whose families had fewer resources, less education, less ability to challenge the system. That's when he started asking me questions about sample storage, Rhea continued. He made it seem like innocent curiosity, but now I realize he was planning something bigger. She pulled up a security footage clip from the clinic's storage room. There was Lucas, talking animatedly with Rhea while she retrieved something from a refrigerated cabinet. As she turned to answer another staff member's question, Lucas's small hand darted out, palming a vial and slipping it into his pocket. He trained Blitz to recognize the scent, Elise whispered, the pieces finally falling into place. That's why Blitz reacted so strongly at the funeral. The vial Lucas hid, it wasn't just proof of the drug's existence. It was proof they had it all along and chose not to give it to certain children. Blitz whined softly, pressing his head against her leg. The dog had known the scent meant something important to Lucas, had faithfully carried out his final task even after losing him. But why didn't he tell us? Colt's voice was rough with emotion. We could have helped him, fought for him to get the real treatment. Rhea shook her head. The minute you started asking questions, they would have buried everything. Lucas knew that. He needed to gather enough evidence first, something they couldn't deny or explain away. So he sacrificed his own treatment, Elise said, the weight of understanding crushing her chest. My baby gave up his chance to get better because he wanted to protect other children. She sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. Colt moved behind her, his hands gripping her shoulders, offering strength even as she felt him shaking. There's more, Rhea said quietly. She opened one final file, a simple text document hidden deep in the system. Lucas wrote this the day before he... The words appeared on screen, typed with a child's imperfect spelling but carrying wisdom far beyond his years. Mom and Dad, if you're reading this, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you, but lots of kids are getting fake medicine and their parents don't know. It's not fair. Blitz knows what the real medicine smells like now. He'll help you prove it. Please don't be sad. I had to try to fix it. Love, Lucas. Elise pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. Her son, her beautiful, brave, compassionate son, had seen an injustice and chosen to fight it, even at the cost of his own life. He was always looking out for others, Colt said, his voice thick with pride and grief. Even at the end, Blitz stood up, moving between them to offer comfort as he had so many times before. But now they understood he wasn't just responding to their sadness. He was carrying out Lucas's final mission, staying faithful to the boy who had trusted him with such an important task. We have to finish what he started, Elise said, wiping her eyes. Not just for Lucas, but for all the children still in the trial. They deserve the truth. They deserve a real chance. Rhea nodded, her own eyes bright with tears. I'll help you. I have access to everything, all the real data, all the deliberately misleading reports. Lucas showed me it's not enough to just feel guilty. We have to act. It won't bring him back, Colt said softly, speaking the pain they all felt. But it will give his choice meaning. He believed in justice so much he was willing to die for it. We owe it to him to see it through. Elise reached for Lucas's note, still resting in its evidence bag. Her fingers traced his words through the plastic. Her son had faced an impossible choice with more courage than most adults would have shown. He'd understood that sometimes doing the right thing came at a terrible cost, but he'd chosen to pay it anyway. The revelation of Lucas's sacrifice burned like fire in her chest, a pain that would never fully heal. But mixed with the agony was a fierce pride, a mother's love magnified by understanding just how special her child had truly been. He hadn't just died from a failed treatment. He had given his life trying to save others. Blitz pressed against her leg, his presence a reminder that Lucas had trusted them to finish his work. The dog's loyalty, Lucas's courage, Rhea's help, and their own determination would expose the truth. That would be Lucas's legacy. Not just a tragedy, but a triumph of justice over greed, of compassion over cruelty. "Okay," Elise said, straightening her shoulders. "Show us everything, Rhea. Every detail Lucas found, every piece of evidence he collected. We're going to make this right." The data continued scrolling across the screen, each line adding to the weight of Lucas's discovery. But instead of crushing them, it strengthened their resolve. Their son had shown them the way. Now it was up to them to follow his path to its end, no matter where it led. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the Reddings' living room windows as Elise spread documents across their dining table. Rhea sat beside her, organizing flash drives and printouts into neat piles. Colt paced nearby, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke with his military contacts. Blitz watched them all with alert attention, as if understanding the gravity of their mission. "Yes, sir," Colt said into the phone. "I need those deployment medical records from 2019 through 2021, particularly anything mentioning the Y-12 trial program." He paused, listening. "I understand the sensitivity, Colonel, but this involves a child's death and potential criminal negligence." Elise glanced up from her work, catching the tension in her husband's jaw. She knew how hard it was for him to challenge the system he'd served faithfully for so long. But Lucas had taught them all that sometimes loyalty meant fighting to change what was wrong, not blindly accepting it. "I found something," Rhea said softly, drawing Elise's attention back to the table. She turned her laptop screen to show a spreadsheet filled with dates and codes. Lucas marked these entries specifically. See how the treatment protocols for the Y-12 group don't match the published guidelines? The placebos were deliberately mislabeled. Blitz's ears perked up at the mention of Y-12, and he moved closer to sniff at the vial they'd found in Lucas's coffin. The dog's consistent reaction to the real medication had become one of their strongest pieces of evidence. "We need someone who can help us present this properly," Elise said, rubbing her tired eyes. "Someone who understands medical trials but isn't part of the system Keene and Voss control." "I might know someone," Rhea offered hesitantly. "There's this journalist, Sarah Martinez. She's exposed other pharmaceutical cover-ups. She has a reputation for being thorough and ethical." Colt ended his call and joined them at the table. "What's her background?" "She's been writing about medical ethics for 15 years, Rhea explained. "She broke the story on the Meridian Lab scandal last year. They tried to discredit her, but her evidence was solid. Every source was verified." Elise nodded slowly. "Can you contact her? Arrange a meeting?" "I still have her card from a conference," Rhea said, digging through her bag. "But we need to be careful. After what happened with your car." The reminder of the attempted assault sent a chill through the room. Blitz moved closer to Elise, his protective instincts heightened. "We'll meet somewhere public," Colt said firmly. "And we go together. No one moves alone anymore." 3 days later, they gathered at a busy coffee shop downtown. Sarah Martinez proved to be a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s, dressed practically in dark slacks and a blazer. She listened intently as they laid out their evidence, taking careful notes but asking few questions until they finished. "Show me everything," she said finally. "Start with the vial." Elise placed the evidence bag on the table. Blitz immediately sat up straighter, nose twitching. Sarah noticed the dog's reaction. "You mentioned he's been trained to recognize this specific medication." "Lucas trained him," Elise explained, her voice catching slightly. "He knew something was wrong with the trial, so he taught Blitz to alert on the real drugs sent. That's how he knew when they were giving placebos instead of treatment." Sarah turned to Rhea. "And you can verify the documentation showing deliberate misallocation of medication?" Rhea nodded, opening her laptop. "I have the original trial logs, plus the altered versions they submitted for review. The discrepancies are clear once you know what to look for. What about military oversight? Sarah asked Colt. This was partially a veterans family support program, wasn't it? Yes, Colt confirmed. I'm gathering records now. There are inconsistencies between what the base medical office recorded and what Keene reported to his superiors. Lucas tracked those too. Sarah sat back, considering. This is compelling, but Voss Pharmaceuticals will fight hard. They'll try to discredit you personally before addressing the evidence. Are you prepared for that? They already tried to run me off the road, Elise said quietly. We know the risks, but Lucas gave his life to expose this. We won't back down. Sarah studied each of them in turn, noting Ria's nervous determination, Colt's steady resolve, Elise's fierce commitment, and even Blitz's alert presence. Finally, she nodded. All right, we'll need to coordinate the release carefully. Time it so they can't bury any one piece of evidence. She pulled out her own laptop. Here's what I suggest. Over the next 2 hours, they built their strategy. Sarah would prepare a series of articles, starting with an overview of the trial's irregularities and building to the specific evidence of misconduct. Ria would provide data showing the pattern of placebo substitution. Colt would contribute military documentation proving the timeline of deception. Elise would present Lucas's own records and Blitz's trained reactions as proof of deliberate misconduct. We release everything simultaneously, Sarah explained. Print, online, and direct to oversight committees. Once it's public, they can't suppress it all. What about physical evidence? Colt asked. The vial, Lucas's notes? I have contacts at independent labs, Sarah assured them. We'll have the contents analyzed, confirm it's the real medication. That backs up everything else. Ria twisted her hands nervously. They'll know I helped. I'll lose my job. You'll be protected as a whistleblower, Sarah said firmly. I've helped other sources through this. We'll have legal support ready before we publish. When do we move? Elise asked. Sarah checked her calendar. Give me 1 week to prepare the initial articles and arrange lab testing. Use that time to gather any final documentation. Then we go public all at once. They left the coffee shop with renewed purpose, their shared mission giving structure to their grief and determination. As they walked to their cars, Colt pulled Elise close. Lucas would be proud, he said softly. We're going to finish what he started. Blitz pressed against their legs, his presence a constant reminder of their son's courage and foresight. The dog had become living proof of both the deception and Lucas's determination to expose it. Back home, they continued organizing evidence. Colt created detailed timelines linking military records to trial dates. Ria worked late into the night, extracting data that proved the systematic denial of treatment. Elise compiled Lucas's notes, showing how a 10-year-old boy had pieced together a conspiracy that adults had either missed or ignored. They knew Keene and Voss would fight back hard, but Lucas had given them the weapons they needed for this battle. His careful planning, Blitz's training, and their combined determination would bring the truth to light. They worked with renewed focus, each piece of evidence a step closer to justice. The week ahead would test their resolve, but they were ready. Lucas had shown them the way. Now they would walk the path he'd marked, together, until the truth could no longer be denied. The first signs of Leonard Voss's retaliation came in thick manila envelopes delivered by courier. Cease and desist letters threatened legal action against Elise, Colt, and especially Ria for alleged breaches of confidentiality. The language was carefully crafted to intimidate without crossing into outright threats. Elise spread the letters across their kitchen table, her hands steady, but her jaw tight. They're trying to scare us into silence. Colt studied the legal documents with a soldier's practiced calm. These are just the opening shots. Voss won't stop here." They were right. Within days, carefully worded press releases appeared, painting the Reddings as grieving parents unable to accept their son's tragic but natural death. The statements expressed sympathy while subtly questioning their mental stability. Social media accounts sprouted up, spreading rumors about Elise's military service and Colt's reliability. "Look at this," Rhea said one evening, showing them her phone. Her voice trembled. "They're saying I was fired from my last job for falsifying data. It's not true, but it's everywhere now." Elise squeezed the younger woman's shoulder. "That's how they work. They're trying to discredit us before we can expose them." The pressure escalated. Black SUVs began parking outside their house, men in dark suits making no effort to hide their surveillance. When Elise drove to the grocery store, another vehicle would follow. When Colt went to the base, security cameras tracked his movements. They took precautions. Rhea moved temporarily into their guest room, safer together than alone. Colt installed additional locks and security cameras. Blitz patrolled the house at night, his military training still sharp despite his years as Lucas's service dog, but they underestimated Voss's ruthlessness. The break-in came at 2:15 in the morning. Elise woke to Blitz's low growl, a sound she hadn't heard since his active duty days. The dog stood rigid by her bedroom door, hackles raised. "Blitz?" she whispered, reaching for the bedside lamp. Before she could turn it on, she heard it, the soft scrape of a window being forced in the living room. Her combat training kicked in instantly. She slipped out of bed and grabbed her phone, texting Colt, who was working a night shift on base. "Intruder, calling 911. She crept to Rhea's room, Blitz at her heel. The younger woman was already awake, eyes wide with fear. "Someone's in the house," Elise breathed. "Stay behind me." They moved toward the kitchen, planning to reach the back door. But a shadow blocked their path, a figure in dark clothes, face hidden behind a mask. He carried something that looked like a tire iron. Blitz didn't hesitate. The German Shepherd launched himself at the intruder with a ferocious snarl. The man swung the metal bar, but Blitz was faster, clamping down on his arm. They crashed into the kitchen island as Elise pushed Rhea toward the back door. "Run!" she shouted, turning to help Blitz. The dog had the intruder pinned, but a second figure emerged from the shadows. This one carried a knife. Blitz released his first target and spun to meet the new threat, putting himself between the attackers and the women. The knife slashed. Blitz yelped but didn't retreat. Blood darkened his fur, but he held his ground, snapping and snarling at anyone who tried to advance. Elise heard sirens in the distance. The intruders heard them too. The one with the knife cursed and backed away. His partner scrambled up, clutching his mauled arm. They fled through the broken window just as headlights swept across the house, Colt's truck screeching into the driveway. "Elise!" he shouted, running inside with his service weapon drawn. "Rhea!" "Here!" Elise called from where she knelt beside Blitz. "We're okay, but Blitz is hurt." Colt's face was ash gray as he secured the house, self-recrimination written in every line of his body. He should have been here, should have anticipated this level of violence. Rhea appeared from the backyard, shaking but unhurt. She immediately went to help Elise with Blitz. The knife had caught him across the shoulder, a long gash that bled steadily. "He saved us," Rhea said, her voice breaking as she helped apply pressure to the wound. "They would have—" She couldn't finish the sentence. They all knew what the intruders had intended. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. Voss was playing for keeps. Police cars arrived, filling their quiet street with flashing lights. Officers took statements while crime scene technicians photographed the broken window and blood drops. Elise never left Blitz's side, speaking softly to the injured dog while they waited for the emergency vet to arrive. "I'm so sorry," Colt said for the 100th time, pacing the kitchen. "I should have been here. "You can't be everywhere," Elise told him. "And we're alive because Blitz remembered his training." The veteran's response was cut off by the arrival of the emergency veterinarian. They watched anxiously as she examined Blitz's wound. "He'll need stitches," she announced, "but the cut isn't as deep as it could have been. He was lucky, and very brave." While the vet worked, Colt pulled Elise aside. "This changes things. They're not just trying to discredit us anymore. They're willing to hurt people." Elise nodded, her expression hardening. "They're showing us exactly why we have to stop them. If they'll do this to us, what else have they done to protect their profits? How many other families have they threatened?" Rhea joined them, still, trembling slightly. "The data I copied. There are other trial groups besides Lucas's, other children who might have been denied treatment." The implications hung heavy in the air. Their fight wasn't just about justice for Lucas anymore. It was about protecting others from a corporation willing to use violence to hide its crimes. Blitz whined softly from where the vet was finishing his stitches. Despite his injury, his eyes remained alert, watching over his family. Just as he had protected Lucas through years of illness, he had protected them tonight. The dog's devotion was a reminder of why they couldn't back down. They spent the rest of the night in the living room, none of them willing to sleep. Colt called the base to request emergency leave. Elise contacted Sarah, the journalist, to update her on the attack. Rhea backed up her evidence to additional secure locations, knowing the stakes had risen dramatically. As dawn broke, they watched Blitz dozing fitfully, his bandaged shoulder a stark reminder of how close they'd come to tragedy. The attack had shaken them, but it had also strengthened their resolve. Voss had shown his true nature, and in doing so, had given them even more reason to expose him. They were no longer just fighting for Lucas's memory. They were fighting to stop a corporation willing to harm innocent people to protect its secrets. The mission had grown larger, but so had their determination to see it through. Blitz stirred, lifting his head to check on them despite his pain. Elise stroked his good shoulder, drawing strength from his unwavering courage. "Good boy," she whispered. "You did so good." The dog's tail thumped weakly against the floor, still ready to protect them despite his injury. His dedication was both inspiring and heartbreaking, a reminder of everything they stood to lose, and everything they had to fight for. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through Lucas's bedroom window, as Elise sat on his unmade bed, her fingers tracing the familiar pattern of his favorite dinosaur blanket. 3 days had passed since the break-in, and the weight of guilt pressed heavier on her shoulders with each passing hour. Blitz lay in his bed in the corner, his bandaged shoulder a constant reminder of what they'd almost lost. The German shepherd's eyes followed her every move, despite his own discomfort. Even injured, he remained vigilant, protective. "I'm so sorry, boy," Elise whispered, her voice catching. "I should have known better. Should have protected you like you protected us." Down the hall she could hear Colt on another tense phone call, his voice low and strained. They'd barely spoken since the attack, both caught in their own spirals of self-recrimination. The distance between them felt like a physical thing, growing wider with each passing day. Elise's gaze drifted to Lucas's medical calendar still hanging on the wall, appointments and treatment dates marked in his careful child's handwriting. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of pain through her chest. "I failed him," she said to Blitz. "I failed Lucas when he was alive, didn't see what was happening with the trial, and now I'm failing him again, putting everyone in danger because I couldn't let it go." Blitz whined softly, struggling to his feet despite his injury. He limped over to her, resting his head on her knee. The simple gesture of comfort only made her tears fall faster. In the kitchen, Colt ended his call and walked heavily to Lucas's doorway. His face looked drawn, older somehow, as if the past few days had aged him years. That was the lawyer, he said, leaning against the doorframe. Voss's people made another offer. Elise stiffened. We're not taking their money. Elise. Colt ran a hand over his face. Maybe we need to think about it. They're offering enough to set up a foundation in Lucas's name. We could help other sick kids, do it legally, safely. By letting them buy our silence? The words came out sharp, angry. Let them keep hurting other children? They already hurt our son. Colt's control cracked. And now they're coming after what family we have left. Ria's had to go into hiding. Blitz got stabbed. What happens next time? What if they succeed? The fear in his voice matched the terror that had been eating at Elise's own heart. She looked down at Blitz, at the white bandage stark against his dark fur. Maybe you're right, she whispered. Maybe I've been selfish, putting everyone at risk for my need for justice. The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared pain and uncertainty. They'd lost their son, and now they were losing each other, piece by piece. Suddenly, Blitz's head lifted from Elise's knee. Despite his injury, he moved with purpose toward Lucas's desk. His nose nudged open the bottom drawer where they'd placed the items from the coffin, the vial, the documents, and Lucas's final note. With careful teeth, Blitz extracted the folded paper. He brought it to Elise, his intent clear even through his pain. She opened it with trembling fingers, revealing Lucas's last message. Finish what we started. Colt moved closer, drawn by the sight of their son's handwriting. He sat heavily on the bed beside Elise as they both stared at the words. He knew, Elise said softly. He knew exactly what he was doing, what the risks were. He was 10 years old and braver than both of us. Blitz pressed against their legs, forming a bridge between them. His loyalty, to Lucas's memory, to their family, hadn't wavered despite his injury. He was still fighting, still believing. Colt's hand found Elise's, squeezing gently. Lucas understood something we forgot, he said. This isn't just about our family anymore. It's about all the families being hurt by Voss's lies. We can't let them win, Elise agreed, drawing strength from her husband's touch. We can't let them turn us against each other. That's what they want. No more guilt, Colt said firmly. No more blame. We do this together, smart and careful, but we don't stop until it's done. Blitz's tail thumped against the floor, as if approving their renewed determination. He may have been injured in the fight, but he wasn't backing down. Neither could they. Elise leaned into Colt's shoulder, feeling the familiar strength of him. Lucas trusted us to finish this, she said. All of us, together. Colt wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. For the first time since the attack, the distance between them began to close. They had lost their way momentarily, let fear and guilt drive them apart. But Lucas's words, delivered by his faithful companion, had brought them back to what mattered. Blitz settled at their feet, his protective instincts undiminished by his wounds. He would heal, and so would they. The path ahead was still dangerous, but they would walk it as a family, carrying Lucas's courage in their hearts. The afternoon light softened, painting Lucas's room in gentle gold. His presence felt closer somehow, living in the words he'd left behind, and in the dog who had loved him so well. Together they would honor his last request. They would finish what he started, no matter the cost. For the first time in days, hope began to replace guilt in Elise's heart. They had each other, they had Blitz, and they had Lucas's truth to guide them. It would have to be enough. In the dim light of Colt's home office, stacks of documents covered every surface. Ria sat at the corner desk, her fingers trembling slightly as she organized her testimony notes. The medical journalist, Sandra Chen, paced behind her, offering gentle corrections. Remember, keep it simple but specific, Sandra advised. Start with the exact date you noticed the data discrepancies. Rhea nodded, highlighting another line. January 15th. That's when I first saw the altered consent forms. Across the room, Elise rehearsed her own testimony, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. Lucas started recording his symptoms on February 3rd. He documented everything: missed doses, changes in his condition, conversations with clinic staff. Colt spread military documents across the dining room table, cross-referencing dates with hospital records. I've got proof they violated 3 separate protocols for service member dependents, he said. The base medical commander's signature was forged on at least 6 documents. Blitz watched from his bed in the corner, still recovering but alert. Earlier that day, they'd recorded him identifying chemical samples, his trained response to the trial drug unmistakable. The video showed him consistently alerting to vials containing the actual medication, ignoring placebos, proof that Lucas had indeed obtained a real sample. The scent identification video is compelling, Sandra noted, reviewing the footage. It corroborates Rhea's testimony about Lucas discovering the placebo group assignment. But will it be enough? Rhea asked softly. Combined with everything else? Sandra gestured at the mountain of evidence. The regulatory board won't be able to ignore this. We have documentation, testimony, physical evidence, and a clear timeline of events. Elise paused her rehearsal, touching Lucas's journal. We have the truth, she said firmly. That's what Lucas gave us. That's what we're going to use to protect other children. They worked late into the night, refining their presentations, strengthening their case piece by piece. Their shared purpose had forged them into something stronger than their individual fears. They were ready to face whatever came next. The hearing room hummed with nervous anticipation. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh glare over the regulatory panel's long desk, where 7 stern faces watched the proceedings. Elise sat straight-backed in her chair, feeling the weight of Lucas's final note in her pocket. Her testimony came first. She spoke clearly, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. My son knew something was wrong. He documented everything: the dates, the symptoms, the differences in what he was promised versus what he received. She pulled out Lucas's carefully kept records, pointing to his childish handwriting that told a devastating story. Rhea followed, her earlier nervousness replaced by quiet determination. She walked the panel through spreadsheets and emails, showing how data had been manipulated. Mr. Voss specifically ordered us to redistribute placebo group assignments. Children who should have received treatment were deliberately placed in the control group. Her finger traced the altered numbers on the projected screen. Colt's military bearing commanded attention as he presented documentation from other service families. These consent forms were changed after signing. The originals promised active treatment, but these families' children were secretly assigned to placebo groups. Leonard Voss and Dr. Keene sat with their lawyers, faces impassive. When their turn came, they delivered smooth, practiced denials. These allegations stem from grief and misunderstanding, Voss stated. Our trials follow all protocols. The panel members exchanged glances, some nodding at the evidence, others frowning at the denials. The chamber's tension peaked as questions began, until a shrill alarm cut through the air. Bomb threat. Everyone evacuate immediately. The orderly hearing dissolved into chaos. People rushed for the stairwells, shoving and pressing. Elise found herself caught in the surge, pushed against a wall as bodies crushed in around her. Her ribs screamed in protest. Suddenly, Blitz's powerful form wedged through the crowd, creating space. Colt's strong hands pulled her free, tucking her against his side as they navigated the panicked mass of people down the stairs. I've got you, he murmured. We're getting out of here. Blitz led the way, his trained instincts clearing a path through the frightened crowd. When they finally reached the street, Elise gasped in fresh air, her heart pounding. She looked at Colt and their faithful dog, knowing how close she'd come to being seriously hurt in that stairwell. Outside the building, police and bomb squad teams swept the premises. After an hour of tense waiting, security declared the all clear. Elise caught Ria's trembling hands in her own. "We're going back in there, together." "They're desperate," Colt added quietly. "That means we're close." They filed back into the hearing room, now half empty but with all key parties present. Leonard Voss sat with forced calm, though his jaw twitched visibly. The panel chairman addressed the disruption with stern authority. "This hearing will continue. Such tactics will not deter our investigation." Elise stepped forward again, Blitz limping faithfully to her side despite his injuries from the break-in. She withdrew Lucas's note, handling it with reverence. "My son wrote this before he died. He knew what was happening and refused to stay silent." Her voice carried clearly as she read Lucas's words aloud, describing his discovery of being in the placebo group and his decision to gather proof. She then presented the chemical analysis of the vial Lucas had hidden. "This is the actual trial drug, which my son obtained to prove what was being withheld from him and others. The lab results confirm it matches the formula exactly." The panel's attention shifted to Voss. "Mr. Voss, how do you explain this evidence?" Voss's composure cracked. His practiced smile faltered as he shuffled papers needlessly. "These are merely allegations from an emotional mother who—" "Who what?" Elise interrupted, her voice steady but fierce. "Who watched her son die while you played games with children's lives? Who has proof that you deliberately denied treatment to boost your trial results?" Blitz raised his head at her feet, amber eyes fixed on Voss. The executive's face flushed red as he struggled to maintain control. "You don't understand the complexities of drug trials." "We understand perfectly," Elise countered. "You sacrificed children for profit. Lucas understood too. That's why he left us the truth." The panel chairman leaned forward. "Mr. Voss, these documents show systematic manipulation of trial groups. Multiple families were deceived. How do you respond to the specific evidence of altered consent forms?" Voss loosened his tie, sweat visible on his forehead. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Voss waved him off. "The pressure from investors. We had to show results." He caught himself, but it was too late. The admission hung in the air like a thunderclap. Dr. Keene slumped in his chair as the panel chairwoman delivered their verdict. "Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, we are immediately shutting down the Y-12 trial. All documentation will be forwarded to federal investigators for criminal prosecution." Voss's face had gone ashen. 2 federal agents appeared at the hearing room doors, badges gleaming. The panel's decision would ripple through the pharmaceutical industry. But for Elise, the victory felt bittersweet. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, fallen leaves crunched under their feet as Elise, Colt, and Ria approached Lucas's grave. Blitz padded along beside them, his limp barely noticeable now. In Elise's hands, she held the official letter from the medical board, a formal acknowledgement of Lucas's role in exposing the fraud and clearing his name. Ria placed fresh flowers by the headstone, while Colt knelt to brush away some leaves. Elise unfolded the letter, her voice steady as she read it aloud. Through extraordinary courage and foresight, Lucas Redding gathered crucial evidence that protected countless other children. His sacrifice and determination revealed a criminal conspiracy and saved lives. Blitz nuzzled the headstone gently, then sat at attention, just as he used to do for Lucas. Tears slid down Elise's cheeks as she placed the letter against the stone, weighing it down with a small rock. He knew exactly what he was doing, Colt said softly, wrapping an arm around Elise's shoulders. Our boy was braver than all of us. Together they stood in the autumn sunlight, united in grief, but strengthened by purpose. Lucas had given them not just a mission, but a way forward through their pain. As they turned to leave, Blitz gave one last look at the grave before falling into step beside them. They would always carry the weight of loss, but now they also carried Lucas's legacy of courage and truth. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.